around the time I turned 30, I first became aware that I was possessed. Unlike in the movies, I wasn't shouting obscenities at priests and spinning my head in circles. I wasn't even possessed for most of my day. Instead, I would just sort of disappear for a few minutes at a time, sometimes an hour, and when I came back, I'd find very little changed. Maybe I'd even driven to work or made pasta, but it hadn't been me doing it. I'm not sure how I invited the demons in. Maybe they'd been there all along, growing slowly, but it's easy to ignore a missing second, even a missing minute. Through my teens and 20s, the demons of time were probably there all along, eating my life a nibble at a time. Now it was disappearing in great big chunks. The problem was worst at work. I'd start working on a PowerPoint for my boss about some little company we were trying to buy, and then, bam! I'd wake up on the BART ride home, listening to some podcast. The work would be done, maybe even done well, but it hadn't been me doing it. I tried to tell myself it wasn't a big deal, like maybe it's actually a benefit to have someone else do your work or cook your dinner. But I had to admit, I was getting a little on edge. Sometimes I'd wake up at night drenched in sweat, a deep pit of fear in my gut. Sure, I had died already, or was about to at any instant. I wonder if I'd been dreaming or sleepwalking or what. And then I'd spend an hour Googling rare sleep disorders and brain tumors and feeling around my skull for lumps. The stuff I'd actually used to care about was starting to go missing too. Like when I watched football, I'd find myself looking up to find a whole quarter had passed and my beer had disappeared without me enjoying even a sip. Then in February, I went to a Super Bowl party. Honestly, it was usually my favorite time of the year. I guess I'd started to drift apart from friends a little, and it was the one time I really carved out to see everyone. But this year, the whole party passed in an instant. As I walked out the door, I realized I didn't remember a single conversation, or a thing I'd eaten, or the final score. There's a woman downtown who helps with these kinds of problems. I visited her in the antique bookstore where she works. She had me sit in an old chair and then poured a circle of salt around me, all the while clicking her tongue like a clock. Then suddenly I blinked, and it was dark outside the window. What happened? I asked.
I spoke with your demons of time,
she informed me.
I asked them to leave, but they refused. There are several infesting you, but I spoke mostly with their leader. He was quite insistent on staying.
Can't you make them leave? I asked, getting slightly annoyed. I didn't pay you $1,000 just to have a conversation with them. She shook her head.
A demon of time isn't quite like other possessive entities. They're not malicious, more like curious scavengers. They want to experience life in our world and to get away from their suffering. We're actually all born with a few inhabiting us. They only get out of hand if you're deeply disengaged with your life. Then they start taking up larger and larger chunks of your time. It's kind of a vicious cycle.
Look, I said, what's it gonna cost to get rid of them? Another couple grand? I've got the money. She shook her head.
You're not listening. You've actually got to care about your life, or this only gets worse. You blink and a day has gone by. Then it's a few days. Then it's a year. You wake up on your deathbed and realize the demon lived your life, and all because you didn't care enough to fight back.
I care, I said. I promise.
Care enough to do the little things to make them go away?
She asked.
Some are basic. Take a walk through the city and look at the edifices of the buildings. Leave your phone on a charger and don't check it. Leave the TV off for a few days and do something you've never done before. Call an old friend. Are you willing to fight like that?
I went home and thought about what the woman said. Mostly I thought about how she'd cost me $1,000. I tried to take her advice. I threw on a coat and headed towards Golden Gate Park. I tried to notice the cracks in the sidewalk and the little plants sprouting there, and the smudges of grey fog overhead. But honestly, trying to pay that level of attention for more than a few minutes was exhausting. It was a shitty day out too, with rain coming down sideways, and after a couple of minutes I was soaked. I ended up heading home and ordering some takeout. As I turned on the TV, I felt my soul slightly fading, like a light on a dimmer. Something was coming to the forefront, eager to watch whatever was on. How could anything be so excited to watch Netflix? I could tell it was starving for any morsel I'd throw at it, even just a few hours of watching TV. Because for the demon, every moment was time away from hell. If it wasn't here, it would be burning in a pit of sulfur. Every boring minute in our world was heaven in comparison. And how was I supposed to care enough to compete with that? Suddenly, the real terror of the situation hit me, because I knew I didn't care enough to fight it. I wasn't gonna take long walks and watch sunsets. I was gonna keep on sleepwalking through life, just like I always had. Somewhere in the dark, I was shaking, acutely aware of my own weakness, and I could see the future stretching out in front of me. A handful of boring decades, mostly lived by something else. I was screaming at myself, furious and terrified, and the thing was watching Friends, laughing its head off at every bad joke, laughing like I never had in my life. And I knew in that moment that I was going to let it win.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed that, please consider subscribing for more. I've been your host, Tom, and until next time,
Stay sleepless.